Hey there, hunters. Welcome back to the Gunners Guild. I'm going to be continuing my coverage of the Remnant From Hell mod before we dip back into Remnant 2 and that juicy ritualist, because that's going to be coming out next week. But in case you didn't catch the previous videos, just a quick recap. From Hell is a mod from Remnant 1 that makes the game just so much harder, but provides the players with a lot of new trinkets, armors, weapons, and mods to play with as you collect new materials from the new encounters in the game. There's a big mod team behind it, and it's still being worked on during Remnant 2's life cycle, albeit a bit slower right now. So I just got back into playing it since I've been kind of having like a lull for Remnant 2 right now, waiting for this DLC, and it's been a long time since I played the From Hell mod, so there's a ton I've missed. And I kind of want to highlight some of the new weapons and items in the games, so I got back to making builds for it. And today we're going to be discussing two builds again, both revolve around the idea that I've done before called Super Slow Mo. I had used this build in base Remnant 1 as well as the From Hell mod before. And the idea was that we can stack slow properties from Spore Bloom's Rot Shot with the slow from the freeze debuff. And it turns out it's pretty good for crowd control and bossing. But today we're going to go back and play with that premise again, but now it's just better. We have new tools to work with. While the two builds I want to discuss share the same core, they are very different from each other. I'm going to start with the traditional mod scaling version of Super Slow Mo. So the core of the Super Slow Mo build is simple. We're going to be using the new Rot Arrow mod, which functions identically to Spore Shot's mod, except that it's got a slightly smaller radius, but holds 3 charges. And since it's an open mod, we can use it on pretty much whatever weapon we want, and we're not tied to just using Spore Bloom. The second part is the Cryogen Blast Amulet. This amulet is a cold version of the detonation trigger, in that all explosions apply hypothermia, which is applying our freeze stacks to slow enemies down. So with this amulet, we can use one mod to apply both of our slows, unlike the original version which required the use of Icy Mist and Spore Bloom rotations. Now, what this really does is allow us for just much more freedom for the build, because we can use whichever 2 weapons we want, provided that one of them has a mod slot available. And we aren't restricted to scaling just our mod damage because of this. Though in this build we still are doing that. So with the slow-mo part of that out of the way, I'm going to be using the Dragon's Breath mod, which is a new mod here, for my shotgun to be my actual damage applicator. And since we want to focus on mod damage, we are required to use Labyrinth armor because it's just insane for that. So while the enemy is slowed, we're going to dump all the damage into them as we can through the use of Dragon's Breath. And I use Dragon's Breath with the shotgun specifically because there's always been this interesting bug or mechanic in Remnant that when you finish shooting a mod out of your shotgun, you temporarily gain the fire rate of the mod. So we can quickly shoot 2 back-to-back shots with our shotgun after our mod's depleted, which generates a ton of more mod power and helps us sustain our mod damage loop. And this mechanic does exist in Remnant 2, by the way. So the goal of fights is to slow down bosses and elites to a crawl, like a damn near stop. And then we're just going to dump flaming shotgun shells into them until we're forced to move. To sustain our Dragon's Breath, we actually have to pair this with two specific rings. The first, of course, is Burden of the Follower for 100% mod generation, and the second is Evoker's Seal, which refunds 15% of the mod costs back on mod use. Now, what makes this and Labyrinth set so extremely broken is that these mod refunds scale with mod generation. So if you're refunding 10% from Labyrinth armor and 15% mod power from this ring, and you have, let's say, 120% mod power generation thanks to a Burden of the Follower and the trait, you're actually going to be refunding 24% and 36% for a total of 60% mod refund. Yeah, it's pretty flippin' nutty. That's why we can shoot like 7 Dragon Breath in a row. Now, of course, we focus entirely on mod generation, so our mod damage per shot isn't actually going to be anything to write home about, but that's okay, we're going for consistency. Because honestly, our guns are going to do absolutely no damage, so we're doing all our eggs in one basket on this mod power. And this is kind of my general purpose build, to be honest, as it pretty much hard stops bosses and elites, and does a pretty good job at crowd control and ad clear, though ranged ads are definitely a big issue with this build. Now, there's not really a lot of other downsides to this one, though before I get into the main problem with this build, I want to discuss the other Super Slow Mo build that I've been working on, because they do share a big problem. So the other Slow Mo build, for those who would rather use ranged weapons and guns over mod power, this one utilizes the Battle Rifle, which is another new weapon here in the From Hell mod. This unique weapon looks like your typical DMR style rifle, moderate fire rate, okay damage, nothing to write home about there, but what makes this special is the mod Full Auto. As you can expect, this mod loads into a special magazine that turns your battle rifle into a fully automatic rifle with double the fire rate and 4 times the stagger. Yeah, that's a lot of stagger, and it staggers very well, which is awesome. So this mod is affecting your main gun itself. So yes, this is a range damage mod, and anything that affects your gun, such as fire rate, spread reduction, and damage, all affect the mod portion of the battle rifle as well. But a big downside to the battle rifle's full auto mode is that it's outrageously hard to control. It does so much recoil. But it sure is a hell of a lot easier if the target isn't moving, huh? So the goal of this range damage version of Super Slow-Mo is to stop the target and then dump the entire clip of full auto into the target's face and just wreck them. And then of course, because we're scaling range damage, we're going to be using range damage sets. Now you can run this with the Hunter setup if you're fighting a boss with weak spots or just for traditional trash clear. You can exploit both the range and weak spot damage bonuses from that. But if the boss doesn't have a weak spot, then something like the Void Armor or the Wanderer set also work out great as well. I say Void because we do get some damage out of our mods just with like the slow-mo ticks and stuff, and it does also help us move faster while we're aiming down sights, so we can avoid some attacks better, especially when the enemies are super slow. The slower roll doesn't matter too much because the bosses should be significantly slower as well, so we shouldn't have too much of an issue recovering from that. And I have to say, I absolutely love the battle rifle, and I really wanted to make it into a build. It just feels really good to use, and it clears trash and adds very well thanks to the big stagger on the mod, and you can also just swap to the mod as an emergency switch to quickly clear a group of ads. I of course wanted to prioritize the mod usage, so we're actually going to be using Burden of the Follower as one of our rings because again we want mod generation. And then the other ring is actually going to be dependent on what you're fighting. If the boss doesn't have a weak spot, then we're going to use Burden of the Gambler. If it's got a weak spot, then we're either going to use Hunter's Band or Empowering Loop or Ring of Flawless Beauty, your choice. But it's interesting because this build is a hybrid range and mod damage build. We're using a lot of the mods for support, but our mod, which actually need the mod generation for, scales off range damage, so we've got to do like a really interesting build. So that's the two builds on offer here, both slow-mo builds, one mod power 1 and one range damage scaling. And I love both these builds very much, but as I mentioned earlier, they do share a big flaw. Slowing down bosses and enemies always looks cool in practice, and you might think that there's no downside. But really, when you slow down bosses, you mess with your muscle memory and your dodging, which is deathly here in the From Hell mod. Not only are slower bosses hard to perfectly evade with their hugely extended attack animations, but also because part of the slow is the cloud of spores that we drop, the second that they step out of that, they speed back up. So you get into situations a lot where you're watching the boss and take its sweet ass time trying to throw a punch, and then suddenly it rockets out at you because it just stepped beyond your spore cloud and you get hit and you're dead. Also, if you happen to be playing with additional modifiers, bosses that have like Teleporter or Displacer become a nightmare for this build. Teleporters just escape your slow-mo zone and smash you in the back, and Displacer will actually pull you around and often throw you into your spore cloud, which still very much hurts you and will get you killed. So you have to play extra careful when you're running these slow-mo setups, despite it looking like on the contrary you don't have to do anything at all. It just gets confusing at times. But honestly, that's about the only negative for these builds, although I do feel like it is a pretty significant one. But that's going to be all for these two builds I just wanted to share, but thank you all for watching, and thank you to my Patreon members. I got one more build video for the From Hell mod to do, and then I think we should be approaching the Remnant 2 DLC release, and then we'll just get back into that. So stick around for those. But yeah, peace and good luck out there, hunters.